Sarah Martinez walked into the Thunder Peak shooting range on a quiet Tuesday morning. She looked nervous and unsure of herself. Her hands shook slightly as she pushed open the heavy glass door. The smell of gunpowder and cleaning oil filled her nose. She had never been inside a shooting range before. The woman behind the front counter looked up from her paperwork. Sarah was wearing simple blue jeans and a plain white t-shirt. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. She kept adjusting her glasses and looking around the room like she was lost. "I need to learn how to shoot," Sarah said in a quiet voice. "Someone broke into my apartment last week. The police said I should learn to protect myself." The counter woman nodded. She had heard this story many times before. People got scared after bad things happened to them. They came to the range thinking a gun would make them feel safe again. "Have you ever fired a gun before?" the woman asked. "No, never," Sarah replied. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. "A friend wrote down your address," she said. "You teach beginners." The woman handed Sarah a clipboard with forms to fill out. Sarah signed her name as Sarah Martinez. She wrote down a local address and phone number. She paid the lesson fee in cash from a small worn wallet. Mike Thompson was the range safety officer that morning. He had been working at Thunder Peak for 15 years. He had trained thousands of new shooters. Most of them were either overconfident men who thought they knew everything or scared women who could barely hold a gun steady. Sarah looked like she belonged in the second group. Mike walked over to lane 7 where Sarah was standing. She was staring at the row of handguns laid out on the counter. Her face was pale, and she was biting her lower lip. First time Mike asked in a friendly voice. "Yes," Sarah said. "I am really nervous. I do not know if I can do this." Mike had given this same talk hundreds of times. He explained gun safety rules. Always treat the gun like it is loaded. Never point it at anything you do not want to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to shoot. Know what is behind your target. Sarah listened carefully to every word. She nodded and asked good questions. She seemed like the type of student who would follow all the rules and be very careful. Mike handed her a basic pistol. It was a simple 9mm that most beginners used. The gun felt heavy in Sarah's hands. She held it awkwardly at first, like she was afraid it might bite her. Something strange happened the moment Sarah gripped the gun properly. Her hands stopped shaking. Her nervous expression changed. She automatically adjusted her stance without Mike telling her how to stand. Her breathing became slow and controlled. Mike noticed the change, but did not think much of it at first. Some people were naturally good at shooting sports. Maybe Sarah had better coordination than most beginners. Sarah raised the gun toward the paper target 25 yards away. The target had circles printed on it with numbers showing point values. Most new shooters aimed for the big outer circles. They were happy if they hit the paper at all. Sarah aimed for the small center circle. The first shot was loud in the concrete room. Mike watched through his binoculars as a small hole appeared in the exact center of the target, right in the middle of the 10-point ring. Lucky shot, Mike thought to himself. Sarah fired again. Another hole appeared right next to the first one, then another, and another. Each bullet hit within inches of the others. Her grouping was tighter than most police officers could manage. Other shooters in nearby lanes began to notice. They stopped. Their own practice to watch the woman in lane 7. She was shooting like someone who had been doing it for years, but Sarah looked as surprised as everyone else. After firing 10 rounds, she lowered the gun and stared at the target. Her face showed genuine confusion. She looked at the gun in her hands like she had never seen it before. "How did I do that?" she asked Mike. Mike pressed the button to bring the target forward on its wire system. When the paper reached them, he could not believe what he was seeing. All 10 shots were grouped in a circle smaller than a silver dollar. The accuracy was perfect. "Have you been practicing somewhere else?" Mike asked. "No," Sarah said. She sounded confused and a little scared. "I have never touched a gun before today. I do not understand what just happened." Mike had Sarah try shooting again, with a different gun. The results were the same. Perfect accuracy. Lightning-fast reloads. Her movements were smooth and professional. She handled the weapons like she had been trained by military experts, but Sarah kept insisting she had never shot before. She seemed genuinely shocked by her own abilities. She would fire a perfect group, then stare at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Word spread quickly through the range about the mystery woman in Lane 7. Instructors came over to watch. Regular customers gathered behind the safety line. Everyone wanted to see the beginner who shot like a world champion. Sarah became uncomfortable with all the attention. She set down the last gun and removed her safety glasses and ear protection. "Thank you for the lesson," she said to Mike. "I think I need to go home now." She walked quickly toward the exit. Mike called after her, asking if she wanted to schedule another lesson. Sarah did not turn around. She pushed through the glass door and disappeared into the parking lot. Mike walked back to Lane 7 and looked at the targets Sarah had left behind. Each one showed perfect shooting. Impossible shooting for someone who claimed to be a complete beginner. Something was not right about Sarah Martinez. Mike had trained military personnel and police officers. He knew what expert-level shooting looked like. The woman who had just left his range was not a nervous beginner learning to protect herself. She was something else entirely. The other shooters slowly went back to their own practice, but they kept talking about what they had seen. The quiet woman who looked ordinary but shot like a professional killer. Sarah sat in her old car in the parking lot for 10 minutes before starting the engine. Her hands were shaking again, but not from nervousness. She was scared of herself. How could she do things she had never learned? Why did holding those guns feel so familiar? She drove home to her small apartment wondering who she really was. The face in her mirror looked the same as always. But something deep inside her had awakened. Something that knew how to kill with perfect precision. Something that should not exist in the mind of an ordinary accountant named Sarah Martinez. 300 miles away from the Thunder Peak shooting range, a computer system that had been sleeping for 8 years suddenly came to life. Deep underground in the Nevada desert sat a government facility that did not appear on any public maps. The building was hidden beneath layers of concrete and steel. Agent David Chen was working the night shift in the monitoring room. He was 26 years old and had only been with the agency for 2 years. Most nights were quiet and boring. He spent his time reading reports and watching security cameras from various locations around the country. At exactly 11:40, 7 p.m., his computer screens began flashing red warning lights. Alarms started beeping loudly in the empty corridor outside his office. David had never seen these particular alerts before. The main screen displayed words in large white letters. Widow. Mark protocol. Activated biometric match. Confirmed subject. 7 online. David stared at the screen trying to understand what he was looking at. He had security clearance for most government programs, but he had never heard of anything called Widow Mark. The computer was showing data from shooting ranges across 12 different states. The system had been monitoring every bullet fired at every registered range in the country. It was looking for very specific patterns: shooting accuracy rates, hand positions, breathing rhythms, reload speeds, heart rate data from security cameras that could detect pulse rates from a distance. All of this information was being compared against something called Operation Sleeping Giant. David tried to access more details about this operation, but his security clearance was not high enough. The files were locked behind classifications he had never seen before. The data showed that someone at Thunder Peak Shooting Range in Colorado had just displayed shooting skills that matched a very dangerous profile. According to the computer, this person was shooting with accuracy levels that were impossible for a civilian. The behavioral patterns suggested military training at the highest levels. David picked up his secure phone and called his supervisor. Agent Williams answered on the second ring, even though it was almost midnight. "Sir, we have a code red situation in the monitoring room," David said. "Something called Widow Mark Protocol has been activated." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. David could hear Agent Williams breathing heavily. "Do not touch anything else," Williams said in a serious voice. "Do not look at any more files. I am calling Director Harrison right now. Stay exactly where you are and do not talk to anyone about this." The phone line went dead. David sat alone in the monitoring room watching more data stream across his screens. The system was now searching through government databases looking for current information about Subject 7. It was pulling up employment records, tax filings, medical records, and rental agreements for someone named Sarah Martinez. 20 minutes later, Director Harrison arrived at the facility. He was a man in his early 60s who usually looked calm and in control. Tonight, he looked worried and tired. He had been pulled out of bed and driven to the base by armed security guards. Harrison had gray hair and wore an expensive suit even at midnight. He walked into the monitoring room and stared at the screens showing all the Widow Mark data. His face went pale as he read the information. Agent Williams arrived 5 minutes after the director. Behind him came 3 other senior officials that David had never seen before. They all gathered around the computer screens, talking in whispers. David heard parts of their conversation. They mentioned something about subjects who had been programmed years ago. They talked about memory suppression and psychological conditioning. They used words like assets and handlers and termination protocols. Director Harrison finally turned to David. "Agent Chen, you are now cleared for classified information regarding Operation Sleeping Giant. What you learned tonight cannot be discussed with anyone outside this room. Do you understand?" David nodded. He was nervous, but also excited to finally be included in something important. 8 years ago, Harrison began, we ran an experimental program called Widow Mark. We created 12 special agents who underwent advanced psychological conditioning. The idea was to place deep-cover operatives in normal civilian lives. They would live as regular people until they received activation codes. The subjects volunteered for the program. David asked. "Yes, they all volunteered," Harrison said. "They knew they would have their memories altered. They knew they would be given new identities and new lives. What they did not know was how dangerous the conditioning process would become." Harrison pulled up files on his tablet showing photos of 12 different people, men and women of various ages and backgrounds. Sarah Martinez was Subject 7. Her photo showed a younger version of the woman from the shooting range footage. The program was designed to create the perfect sleeper agents, Harrison continued. They would have all their specialized training buried deep in their subconscious minds. Normal life experiences would be layered on top. They would genuinely believe they were regular civilians. But something went wrong, Agent Williams added. The subjects began showing signs of psychological breakdown. Some could not handle learning the truth about themselves. Others became unpredictable and violent when their training started to surface. "We shut down the program," Harrison said. "All 12 subjects underwent memory suppression procedures. We gave them completely new identities and histories. They were supposed to live normal lives with no memory of their training or their real purpose." David looked at the screens showing Sarah Martinez shooting with impossible accuracy. "But the suppression did not work completely," he said. "Apparently not," Harrison replied. "The system was designed to monitor for any signs that the conditioning was breaking down. What happened at that shooting range today means Subject 7 is remembering her training. Her skills are coming back online." "Is she dangerous?" David asked. "Extremely," Harrison said. "Sarah Martinez, as she knows herself, is a harmless accountant. But the person buried in her mind is Agent Widow Mark 7. She was trained in 17 different fighting techniques. She speaks 4 languages. She knows how to kill people in over 30 different ways without leaving obvious evidence." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Outside the facility, the desert wind was blowing across the hidden base. Inside the monitoring room, red lights continued flashing as the computer system tracked Sarah Martinez through various databases. "What do we do now?" Agent Williams asked. "We find her before anyone else does," Harrison said. "There are people who know about the Widow Mark program, people who might want to eliminate the surviving subjects before they become fully operational again." Harrison turned back to David. "Agent Chen, you are now part of a very small team that knows this information exists. We need to locate Sarah Martinez and bring her in safely. If she is reverting to her original programming, she will be confused and probably scared." But David said, looking at the shooting range footage, she could also be extremely lethal if she feels threatened. Harrison nodded grimly. "That is exactly what we are afraid of." Agent Widow Mark 7 was designed to be the perfect weapon, and now she might be waking up after 8 years of peaceful sleep. The computer screens showed Sarah Martinez driving home to her apartment. She had no idea that her entire world was about to change forever. Sarah could not sleep that night. She lay in her small bed staring at the ceiling of her apartment. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself at the shooting range. She remembered the feeling of the gun in her hands. It had felt natural and comfortable, like she was holding something that belonged to her. She got up and walked to her bathroom mirror. The face looking back at her was the same one she had seen every day for years. Brown eyes, dark hair, a small scar on her chin from falling off her bike as a child. Everything looked normal, but something felt different inside her head. Sarah made herself a cup of coffee and sat at her kitchen table. She tried to remember learning to ride that bike. She tried to remember falling and getting the scar. The memory felt fuzzy and unclear, like she was watching someone else's life through thick glass. Her hands were steady as she held the coffee mug. At the shooting range, her hands had been shaking before she picked up the gun. After that, they had been perfectly calm. Why did holding a weapon make her feel more relaxed than sitting in her own kitchen? Strange dreams came when she finally fell asleep near dawn. She saw herself wearing dark clothing and moving through buildings she did not recognize. In the dreams, she knew exactly where she was going. She knew which doors to open and which hallways to avoid. There were other people in the dreams, men in military uniforms who called her by a different name. They said Agent Martinez instead of Sarah. They gave her instructions in languages she did not remember learning. But in the dreams, she understood every word perfectly. She dreamed about weapons training in large, empty rooms. Someone was teaching her how to fight without guns, how to disable people quickly and quietly, how to disappear in crowds, how to change her appearance and voice to become someone else entirely. The most disturbing dream was about a man in a white coat. He was asking her questions while she sat in a chair with wires attached to her head. He kept saying the words, memory suppression and identity replacement. He told her that Sarah Martinez would be a happy, normal person who would never remember being anyone else. Sarah woke up breathing hard and covered in sweat. The dreams had felt more real than her actual memories. She touched the back of her head where she remembered the wires being attached. Her fingers found a small scar hidden under her hair near the base of her skull. The scar was perfectly round and very precise, like something a surgeon would make during a delicate operation. Sarah had never had any kind of head surgery. She did not remember getting injured or being in a hospital, but the scar was definitely real. She called in sick to her job at the accounting firm where she had worked for 5 years. Her boss was understanding. Sarah had never taken a sick day before and was always reliable. He told her to rest and come back when she felt better. Instead of resting, Sarah began searching through her apartment, looking for clues about her past. She pulled out boxes of old photographs and papers. She found her college graduation pictures and letters from friends. Everything seemed normal and consistent with the life she remembered, but as she looked closer, she noticed strange things. In her college photos, She was always standing a little apart from other students. Her smile looked forced and unnatural. She was in the pictures, but she did not look like she belonged with the other people. Her college transcripts showed excellent grades in psychology and foreign languages. Sarah did not remember being particularly interested in either subject. She had thought she studied business and accounting. Why would she have taken advanced classes in Russian and Arabic? A letter from her mother mentioned Sarah winning a shooting competition in high school. The letter congratulated her on becoming state champion in marksmanship. Sarah read the letter 3 times. She had no memory of ever being on a shooting team. She did not remember winning any competitions. Her phone rang while she was reading, through more papers. The caller ID showed a number she did not recognize, but something deep in her mind told her to answer it. "Hello, Sarah," a calm male voice said. "Or should I call you Agent Martinez? We need to talk." "Who is this?" Sarah asked. Her heart was beating fast, but her voice sounded steady and controlled. "Someone who knows who you really are," the voice replied. "Someone who has been waiting 8 years for you to wake up. Meet me at Riverside Park in 1 hour. Come alone and do not tell anyone about this call." "Wait," Sarah said, but the line was already dead. She stared at her phone, trying to decide what to do. The smart thing would be to call the police and report a threatening phone call from a stranger. But something inside her knew this was not a threat. This was someone with answers to questions she had not known she needed to ask. Sarah changed into dark jeans and a black sweater. She chose clothes that would help her blend into shadows. She did not consciously decide to dress this way. Her hands picked the clothing automatically while her mind was thinking about other things. She put her hair up and checked her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her stood straighter and moved differently. Her eyes were alert and watchful. She looked like someone who could handle dangerous situations. Sarah left her apartment and walked toward Riverside Park. She took a route that avoided main streets and busy intersections. She stayed near buildings where she could duck into doorways or alleys if needed. Again, her feet chose this path without her brain making the decision. The park was mostly empty in the late afternoon. A few joggers were using the main path, but the area near the river was quiet. Sarah found a bench that gave her a clear view of all the approaches. She sat down and waited. A man in his 50s approached from the direction of the parking lot. He was average height with gray hair and wore a simple brown jacket. He looked like any other middle-aged man you might see anywhere. But Sarah noticed. He was scanning the area carefully before he sat down next to her. "Hello, Sarah," he said in the same voice from the phone call. "My name is Gray. I used to be your handler back when you knew yourself as Agent Widow Mark 7. Sarah looked at his face and felt a strange sense of recognition. She had definitely seen this man before, even though she could not remember where or when. "You were in my dreams," she said. "Those were not dreams," Gray replied. "Those were memories trying to surface, the conditioning that was supposed to keep them. Buried is breaking down. What happened at the shooting range yesterday triggered something that has been sleeping in your mind for 8 years. "What conditioning?" Sarah asked. "What are you talking about?" Gray opened a manila envelope and handed her a photograph. It showed a younger version of herself wearing military clothing and holding an assault rifle. She was standing with other people in similar gear in what looked like a desert location. "This is who you used to be," Gray said quietly. "Before you became Sarah Martinez, the accountant. Before they gave you a new life and new memories. Before they tried to make you forget that you were one of the most dangerous people on Earth." Gray had been watching Sarah's apartment building since 5 in the morning. He sat in a rented car with tinted windows parked across the street. 8 years ago, he had been Agent Sarah Martinez's handler when she was known as Widow Mark 7. Back then, she had been one of the most effective operatives he had ever worked with. The Widow Mark program had created 12 subjects through advanced psychological conditioning. Sarah had been the 7th person to complete the process successfully. She could speak 4 different languages fluently. She had mastered 17 different fighting techniques. She knew over 30 ways to kill a person without leaving obvious evidence behind, but the program had a serious problem. The human mind was not designed to hold two completely separate identities at the same time. Some subjects began mixing memories between their cover lives and their agent personalities. Others had complete mental breakdowns when they discovered the truth about what they had become. Gray remembered the day they shut down Widow Mark. Sarah had been in the middle of a mission in Eastern Europe when the recall order came through. She had been confused and angry about being pulled back to Besse. She had no idea that within a month she would have no memory of ever being a secret agent. The memory suppression process was supposed to be permanent. The doctors had assured everyone that the subjects would live normal, happy lives with no trace of their former training. Apparently, the doctors had been wrong about how completely they could erase 8 years of intensive conditioning. Gray watched Sarah leave her apartment building that afternoon. Even from a distance, he could see that she was moving differently. Her walk was more purposeful and alert. Her eyes were scanning the area with professional awareness. The old Sarah was fighting to emerge from behind the false identity they had created. He followed her to Riverside Park, staying far enough back that she would not notice him. But Gray suspected that her surveillance detection skills were already coming back online. A fully operational Widow Mark agent would spot a tail within minutes. Sarah chose a bench that gave her excellent visibility of all approaches to her location. She sat with her back protected and clear escape routes on both sides. These were not conscious decisions. Her training was taking over even though she did not fully understand why. Gray approached carefully, keeping his hands visible and moving in a non-threatening manner. He remembered that Sarah had always been cautious but reasonable. She would listen before she decided whether someone was an enemy or an ally. "Hello, Sarah," he said, using the same calm voice he had used during their phone conversation. "My name is Gray. I used to be your handler back when you knew yourself as Agent Widow Mark 7. He sat down on the bench next to her and waited for her reaction. Sarah was studying his face with intense concentration. Her mind was trying to match his appearance with fragments of returning memories. "You were in my dreams," she said after a moment. "Those were not dreams," Gray replied. "Those were memories trying to surface. The conditioning that was supposed to keep them buried is breaking down. What happened at the shooting range yesterday triggered something that has been sleeping in your mind for 8 years. Gray could see both versions of Sarah at the same time. The confused accountant was frightened and looking for explanations. But behind her eyes, Agent Widow Mark 7 was evaluating him as a potential threat. She was calculating distances and noting his body language for signs of deception. He opened the manila envelope he had brought with him. Inside were photographs and documents that told the story of who Sarah had really been. The first photo showed her in military gear holding an assault rifle. She was standing with other Widow Mark subjects at a training facility in Nevada. "This is who you used to be," Gray said quietly. "Before you became Sarah Martinez, the accountant. Before they gave you a new life and new memories. Before they tried to make you forget that you were one of the most dangerous people on Earth." Sarah took the photograph with steady hands. She stared at the image for a long time without speaking. Gray could almost see the memories clicking back into place in her mind. "I remember this place," she said finally. "There were 12 of us in the program. We lived in underground rooms and trained 18 hours every day. We learned languages and fighting techniques and how to become other people." Gray nodded. "You were the best student in your class. You completed missions in 6 different countries. You saved lives and protected national security. You volunteered for all of it because you wanted to serve your country." "Why do I not remember volunteering?" Sarah asked. "My earliest clear memory is starting college when I was 18 years old, because they had to erase those memories to keep you safe," Gray explained. The program was shut down after some subjects began having serious psychological problems. The government decided it was too dangerous to continue. He handed her more photographs showing the other widow-mark subjects. Some of the faces looked familiar to Sarah. Others were complete strangers, even though she had lived and trained with them for years. "What happened to the others?" she asked. "Most of them are dead," Gray said quietly. "Over the past few years they have been dying in what look like accidents, car crashes, house fires, random robberies gone wrong. Someone has been systematically eliminating everyone who was part of Widow Mark." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Are they coming for me too?" Gray opened a newspaper and showed her the headline from 3 days ago. It read, "Local accountant dies in gas leak explosion." The photo showed a woman who looked very similar to Sarah. This was Subject 9, Gray said. She was living as a teacher in Ohio under the name Jennifer Walsh. Her apartment building exploded due to what investigators called a faulty gas line, but I know it was not an accident. "Who is killing them?" Sarah asked. "Someone who knows about the program and has access to the subject files," Gray replied. "Someone who thinks active Widow Mark agents are a threat that needs to be eliminated. But we are not active anymore," Sarah said. "We do not even remember being agents." "You do now," Gray pointed out. "And yesterday at the shooting range you demonstrated abilities that only a handful of people in the world possess. That kind of performance gets noticed by people who know what to look for." Sarah looked at the photographs again. In her mind, she could hear voices speaking foreign languages. She could remember the weight of weapons and the feeling of moving through enemy territory. The memories were becoming clearer and more detailed with each passing minute. "If someone is hunting us, we need to find the other survivors," Gray said. "We need to warn them and help them remember their training before it is too late." "How many are still alive?" Sarah asked. "As far as I know, there are 3 others besides you," Gray replied. "But they might not believe us when we try to contact them. They have been living normal lives for 8 years. They might think we are crazy." Sarah stood up from the bench and looked around the park with professional awareness. She was automatically checking for potential threats and escape routes. Her body was remembering things her conscious mind had forgotten. "We have to try," she said. "If these people are being killed because of something we used to be, then we have a responsibility to help them." Gray smiled for the first time since their conversation had started. There was the Agent Widow Mark 7, he remembered, always ready to take action when innocent lives were at stake. "But Sarah, we need to be careful," Gray warned. "Once you fully remember who you used to be, there will be no going back to your old life. Sarah Martinez, the accountant, will be gone forever." Sarah looked at him with clear, steady eyes. She was not Sarah Martinez anymore. That person had been a fiction created to hide the truth. She was Agent Widow Mark 7, and she had work to do, Good Gray said, "because we have less than 24 hours before they find you, and when they come, they will not be expecting to face a fully operational Widow Mark agent." Sarah spent that night reading through every document Gray had given her. With each page, more memories came flooding back. She remembered training sessions in underground rooms. She remembered learning to speak Russian from a woman with cold blue eyes. She remembered practicing how to kill people quickly and quietly. The worst part was realizing that her entire life as Sarah Martinez had been carefully constructed. The accounting job had been arranged by the agency to keep her busy and monitored. The apartment was in a building owned by a government-front company. Even some of her friendships had been with people who were paid to watch her and report on her behavior. Everything she thought she knew about herself was a lie. By dawn, Sarah felt like a different person. The frightened accountant was gone. In her place stood Agent Widow Mark 7, who was trained to handle dangerous situations. Her body remembered how to move with deadly precision. Her mind was sharp and focused on survival. The attack came at exactly 6 in the morning. Sarah was making coffee in her kitchen when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. 3 sets of boots moving in tactical formation. Professional killers who thought they were dealing with a confused civilian who had stumbled onto classified information. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The first man came through, her front door using a small explosive charge to blow the lock. He was wearing black tactical gear and carrying an automatic weapon. His face was covered by a military-style mask. He expected to find Sarah cowering in fear. Instead, he found an empty kitchen with the back door standing open. Sarah had moved the moment she heard the footsteps. Her training took over completely. She slipped out the back door and around the side of the building. Now she was behind the attackers while they searched her apartment. The second man came through the front door 30 seconds after the first. Sarah watched from the shadows as he moved through her living room, checking corners and doorways. His movements were professional but predictable. Military training but not special forces level. Sarah waited until he was in the perfect position. Then she moved. She came through the back door like a ghost. The second attacker had no warning. Sarah hit him in the neck with a precise strike that knocked him unconscious instantly. He dropped to the floor without making a sound. The first attacker heard nothing because Sarah had learned how to move in complete silence. She took his weapon and zip-tied his hands behind his back using restraints she found in his tactical vest. Within 2 minutes, she had turned hunters into prisoners. The third man was supposed to be watching the hallway as backup. Sarah found him looking the wrong direction. She put him to sleep with a pressure point technique that would keep him unconscious for several hours. Gray arrived 20 minutes later expecting to find a battle scene. Instead, he found Sarah sitting calmly at her kitchen table with 3 professional killers tied up and disarmed. She had a cup of coffee in one hand and was examining their equipment with professional interest. "They are not government agents, Sarah," reported in a calm voice. "Private military contractors. Someone hired them to eliminate loose ends from the Widow Mark program." Gray looked at the unconscious men with amazement. 8 years ago, Sarah had been deadly. Now she was operating at a level that impressed even him. "How did you know they were coming?" he asked. "I heard them setting up surveillance positions around the building at 4 this morning," Sarah replied. "They were good, but not good enough to fool someone with my training." "We need to leave," Gray said. "There will be more teams coming, and they will not underestimate you again." Sarah was already packing a small bag with essential items. She moved with efficient speed, gathering things she would need for life on the run. Gray noticed she was choosing items based on tactical value rather than sentimental attachment. "What about the others?" Sarah asked. "Are they in immediate danger?" "I contacted Subject 3 this morning," Gray said. "She is living as a librarian in Portland under the name Jennifer Walsh. She started having memory flashes after your incident at the shooting range triggered the monitoring system, and the other 2 survivors. Subject 11 is in Chicago working. Construction. His name is Mike Torres now. Subject 4 is in Miami. She has been fighting her conditioning for months, trying to stay normal." Sarah looked at herself in the hallway mirror one last time. The woman looking back was no longer Sarah. Martinez, the accountant. She was Agent Widow Mark 7, and she had people to protect. They left through the building basement using a route Sarah had planned during her surveillance detection that morning. She had identified 3 different escape paths and multiple safe houses within a 20-mile radius. Her tactical planning skills were fully operational. Gray drove while Sarah studied maps and planned their next moves. She was thinking several steps ahead, calculating risks and backup plans. This was how her mind had been trained to work during the Widow Mark program. "We need to get to Portland first," Sarah said. "Jennifer will be confused and scared when her memories start coming back. She will need help understanding what is happening to her." "What if she does not want to remember?" Gray asked. "What if she prefers her life as a librarian?" Sarah looked at him with cold, professional eyes. "She does not have that choice anymore," Someone is hunting us, and the only way to survive is to remember who we really are and what we can do. They drove through the morning toward Portland. Behind them, Sarah apartment building was surrounded by police cars and ambulances. The three attackers had been found and arrested, but they refused to identify who had hired them. In Nevada, the monitoring systems were tracking Sarah movement through credit card usage and cell phone signals. Director Harrison was coordinating search teams from multiple agencies. Everyone wanted to find the widow Mark subjects before more people got hurt. But Sarah was no longer running blind and confused. She was a trained operative with 8 years of advanced conditioning. She knew how to disappear and how to fight back against people who wanted her dead. The hunt had begun, but now the hunters were not sure who was chasing who. Sarah checked the weapons she had taken from the attackers. Everything was in working order. She had enough ammunition for a serious fight if it came to that, but she hoped they could reach the other survivors before violence became necessary. Gray watched her preparing for combat and remembered why the Widow Mark program had been so effective. These people were not just trained killers. They were protectors who would risk everything to save innocent lives, even if those innocent lives happened to be their own forgotten identities. By noon, they were crossing the Colorado state line heading toward a confrontation that would determine whether the surviving Widow Mark agents lived free or died as loose ends in someone else's plan for covering up the truth. Sarah was ready for either outcome. She had been trained for this her entire adult life, even when she did not remember it. The safe house was a small cabin hidden in the mountains of Montana. Gray had used this location during the original Widow Mark program for emergency meetings and debriefings. The building looked ordinary from the outside, but Sarah could see it had been designed for defense. She walked through the rooms, identifying 17 different positions where someone could take cover during an attack. There were 3 separate escape routes and enough supplies to survive for several weeks. Her tactical assessment skills were working perfectly, even though she had not used them for 8 years. They had successfully contacted 2 other surviving Widow Mark agents. Jennifer Walsh had been living as a librarian in Portland when her memories began returning. She drove to Montana after Gray convinced her that her life was in danger. She arrived at the cabin looking confused and frightened. Mike Torres had been harder to convince. He was working construction in Chicago and thought Gray was crazy when he first called. But when Mike started remembering things from his past, he realized he needed answers. He flew to Montana using a fake identity that his subconscious mind remembered how to create. The 3 survivors sat around a wooden table studying files that Gray had brought from his years as their handler. Each person was remembering different pieces of their training and their missions. Together, they were starting to understand the full scope of what the Widow Mark program had accomplished. Jennifer had been Subject 3. She specialized in languages and cultural infiltration. She could become anyone from any country and blend in perfectly with local populations. Her memories were returning slowly, but she was starting to remember missions in South America and Asia. Mike had been Subject 11. His skills were in explosives and mechanical sabotage. He could destroy buildings or vehicles without leaving evidence. He was also trained in hand-to-hand combat and could disable multiple attackers without using weapons. Sarah was remembering that she had been the team leader for many joint operations. The 3 of them had worked together on several high-priority missions that officially never happened. They had saved lives and prevented terrorist attacks in situations where regular military forces could not be used. But someone wanted them all dead now. Gray spread out intelligence reports he had gathered from his contacts in various government agencies. Over the past 2 years, all the Widow Mark subjects had been dying in apparent accidents, car crashes that were too convenient, house fires that started in suspicious ways, random crimes that seemed to target very specific people. The pattern was clear to anyone who knew what to look for. Someone with access to classified files was systematically eliminating everyone who had been part of the program. Jennifer found the answer while studying personnel records from the original Widowmark facility. She had always been good with paperwork and research. Her librarian training had made her even better at finding hidden connections between different pieces of information. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a name on a security clearance list. Colonel James Voss was General Morrison's aide during the time when Widowmark was being shut down. He had access to all the subject files and termination procedures. Sarah remembered General Morrison. He had been one of the few military officials who opposed the Widowmark program from the beginning. He thought it was too dangerous and unethical to mess with people's minds the way they were doing. "Morrison died 6 months ago," Gray said. "Car accident on a mountain road." But what if it was not an accident? What if someone killed him to get access to classified information he was protecting? The pieces began falling into place. Colonel Voss had been selling government secrets to private military contractors for years. He knew that active Widowmark agents could expose his entire operation if they began remembering their missions and the classified information they had access to, so he decided to eliminate them before they could become a threat. Sarah felt anger building inside her as she realized what had happened. 9 of their fellow agents were dead because one man wanted to protect his illegal activities. People who had volunteered to serve their country had been murdered to cover up someone else's crimes. "We need to stop him," she said in a cold voice that Mike and Jennifer had never heard before. "This is not just about saving ourselves anymore. This is about getting justice for the people who have already died." Gray looked worried. "Sarah, you are talking about going after a high-ranking military officer who has connections throughout the intelligence community. Even if we prove he is guilty, it will be nearly impossible to bring him to justice through normal channels." "Then we do not use normal channels," Sarah replied. "We use the skills they taught us. We make him face the consequences of what he has done." Jennifer and Mike exchanged glances. They could see that Sarah was fully operational now. The confused accountant was completely gone. In her place sat Agent Widow Mark 7, who was capable of things that would terrify most people. But they also remembered why they had trusted her during their original missions. Sarah had always been willing to do whatever was necessary to protect innocent people. She had risked her own life multiple times to save others. The final confrontation came at the Nevada facility where they had all been trained years ago. Colonel Voss was using the abandoned base as a meeting point with his criminal contacts. He thought the location was secure because officially it did not exist anymore. He was wrong. The 3 Widowmark agents moved through the underground complex like ghosts. They used skills that had been buried for 8 years, but were now sharp and deadly. They neutralized Voss' security team without killing anyone, but made it clear that resistance was futile. Sarah found Voss in the main control room where her original programming had taken place. He was a man in his 50s who looked soft and weak compared to the professional killers he usually hired to do his dirty work. "Colonel Voss," she said, stepping out of the shadows, "you have been eliminating my people. Tonight, that ends." Voss reached for a weapon, but Mike had already removed it along with his phone and radio. The colonel was alone and trapped with 3 of the most dangerous people the government had ever created. "You do not understand," Voss said, trying to sound confident. "I was protecting national security. Widowmark agents were too dangerous to leave active. You prove that just by being here." Sarah looked around the room where they had taken her memories and given her a false life, where they had tried to turn her into someone else entirely. "We were never the danger," she said quietly. "You were. You sold out your own country for money. You killed innocent people to protect yourself. You are exactly the kind of person we were, trained to stop." When it was over, Colonel Voss was in federal custody, facing charges for treason and murder. The surviving Widowmark agents had evidence that would put him in prison for the rest of his life. The threat to their lives was finally ended. Sarah stood outside the Nevada facility as the sun came up over the desert. She could choose to undergo new memory suppression procedures and try to return to being a normal person. The government doctors said they could give her a peaceful life with no memory of violence or danger, but Sarah had already made her decision. She walked away from the facility with Jennifer and Mike. They had formed their own organization using their unique skills to help people who could not help themselves. The Widow Mark program was officially dead, but its survivors had found a new purpose. Sarah Martinez, the accountant, was gone forever. Agent Widow Mark 7 had work to do in a world that needed people willing to fight for justice even when no one else could or would. She looked like any other person walking down the street, but when the situation required it, she could become something much more dangerous and much more necessary. The system had created her to be a weapon. She had chosen to become a protector instead.